All right, I'm doing my topic on the rise of rock and roll in the 1950s and 60s, a little bit of 40s, kind of all happened in the same area. And I knew about this a little bit before, but not a ton. And looking into it, I found that I was really interested in it. And so this project was really fun for me because I learned a lot of things that I didn't know. But anyway, my thesis is the rise of rock and roll not only changed the music industry by introducing new sounds and styles, but also significantly influenced social and cultural movements by challenging traditional norms such as racial segregation and conservative values. I'm going to start off with the book because I feel like my primary sources kind of touch on what the book touched on as well. I did The Emergence of Rock and Roll by Mitchell K. Hall. I found it really interesting and I learned a lot. And I really enjoyed reading this book. Anyway, to start out, I want to start out about why rock and roll was so impactful over other music genres. And it's because, or influenced so many people, I guess I should say. And it's because baby boomers are one of the most, I guess, massive generations. Post-war, people were having tons of kids, and there was a mass. And they're the first generations, this is post-war, so they're the first generation to really have freedom. They didn't have to provide for their family like other kids did. They didn't have to, when they got a job, they didn't have to give their money to their parents to support their family. They were able to use it for themselves as individuals. And so them having the individual sort of freedom and being so much of them, they kind of were influenced differently and easier, I guess I should say, than the other generations. And they weren't brought up like the other generations were. So they were very easily influenced. So popular music, the music that was becoming popular was really challenging the norms in the 50s. The conservative norms, there was a lot of separation between African Americans and whites and different cultures and such during this time as well. And in the 50s, blues music started to become very popular. At first, it wasn't African American artists that were becoming popular. It was white people covering their music to make it popular. There was, like I said, there was a piece, and it gave teenagers the freedom of their own personalities. Rock and roll music was a way for teenagers to vent their excitement and create their own identity. It just kind of made them different from their parents, and I think they really enjoyed that at the time. Rock and roll also grew in popularity because of TVs, and so when TVs started becoming big, radio needed to fill their time and they started playing music. And radio started playing Black Rhythm Blues, and teens started listening to it a lot and they really enjoyed it. There's only a few number of black DJs at the time, but when the popularity started to happen, it went from 16 out of 3,000 black radio stations to 500. And so that was a drastic change, and that caused a lot of, I don't think it caused controversy, but it was a big change. It changed the norms, and yeah. One of the things, Alan Freed, he is in my my primary sources, but he's one of the big DJs that did radio, and he was putting on a show, and the arena was big enough for 10,000 people, and 16,000 showed up, and it caused the show to be canceled, and whites criticized him for causing a black mob, is what they said at the time. They started this new trend where DJs started playing the most popular songs on repeat. Guardians did not like this because the most popular songs were the controversial songs that were black artists at the time and were a little bit more upbeat. And Guardians of teenagers did not like this at the time because it was being a bad influence. Crossovers became popular, where they would cross music genres, mix them together to get a wider audience. Covers, white people would cover black songs, and they would sell more than the originals, but it would get the music out there. Some record buyers were influenced by racial attitudes. As the decade progressed, younger artists were successful because they appealed to the youthful attitude. The big problem with this is that there was a youthful attitude. That's what was so controversial about it, because these parents didn't want their kids being rebellious and all the things. One of the biggest musicians at the time that was controversial was Little Richard. He bent social norms because of homosexuality and stage makeup. This was very popular with the teens, and he was called a lightning rod. Parents did not like him because he was causing bad influence on the teens, as homosexuality was not okay at this time. Elvis caused a lot of controversial opinions after a live broadcast of one of his shows. People said and believed that he roused sexual passions of teenage youth, that he was a danger to the security of the United States. Even in one of his shows in Florida, this wasn't in the book, but I remember they told him that he needed to keep it in line, that he wasn't allowed to do his wiggles, and he did a little thing where he went like that, or they said something about him not being allowed, or they said you better not as much as wiggle a pinky or something like that, and he went like this, and he put on his normal stage performance, and this caused him to get an arrest warrant for impairing the morals of minors. That's what the arrest warrant was for. And that was that. I believe that's why they wanted to send him off to the military, but I'm not 100% sure. They called Jerry Lee Lewis Every Parent's Nightmare because of his sexuality and how open he was about it, and he also got into some controversial things with marriage, and he sort of got canceled at some point. Rock and roll music caused teens to have sexual desires. Dick Clark was a host, or a radio host, but he wanted the popularity of rock and roll, but he wanted it to be tamer. He was not okay with the behavior, really. So Dick Clark hosted a cleaner show, making rock and roll tamer and more uniform. He had a concern with his image, so he made people wear uniforms and made his musical guests look a certain way, and called them teen idols to get a positive look for teen idols. Let's see. Black artists started advancing up in the charts as whites were buying their records. A lot of teenagers were buying black artist records, which was very good. This caused racist whites to lash out because it brings out animalism and vulgarity, was quoted. Page 29. Adults did not like the music's sexuality, saying it was suggestive and vulgar and tinged with animalism. They said that word a lot. I don't know why, but anyway. It was described as elemental, savage, and dripping with sex. It was just what our parents feared, was another quote. Martin Luther King, there was a Martin Luther King quote in here. He even said, often plunges men's minds into degrading and immoral depths. People believed that rock and roll was linked with violence. Some cities even banned rock and roll concerts. They didn't like that. They said that this music undermined the authority of family, church, and state. And then Frank Sinatra even said that the material music of every that this was the material music of every sideburn delinquent on the face of the earth. That kind of sums up what I thought was most important about the book. Moving on, I'll do the documentary because I did The Beat. I believe I want to do this next because I also believe that this touches a little bit on some of my primary sources as well. So The Beat, the meaning of The Beat, the reason why people call themselves with The Beat was they were exhausted, kind of open-souled people that, didn't really plan on having the American dream, like the wife, the 2 kids, all that sort of thing. They were kind of the, it actually says it here. The Beats had the idea of the American dream, but for people that never stop moving and have crazy ideas. In the documentary, they said it was for the mad people. Memphis, I found out, was a very, very influential cause to the rise of rock and roll. Probably, in my opinion, one of the most, because Memphis was a very musical place for black musicians and radio stations. More and more whites started to listen to these radio stations in Memphis. Eventually caused a racial crossover where they were listening to black music. Memphis heavily influenced Elvis, and is much of the reason he sang the way he was singing. Elvis moved there when he was a young kid. He lived in a sort of a black neighborhood that was very religious and very musically, and that's kind of how the music he grew up on. And then he moved to Memphis, and the documentary said that he was a kid in a candy store, like it just fed into his interests. Sun Records opened up in Memphis. They're looking for a true talent. That's what they had stated. Elvis recorded That's All Right Mama, and it was everything Sam Phillips was looking for. They stated that it was hard to sell on white stations, so when they were looking for someone to play this song, where it would reach a lot of people, and they played it for one of the biggest Memphis DJs that played rock and roll and did the mix, and they said that he had listened to it like 5 or 6 times, and he loved it and played it around 15 times that night and had the whole city listening to it. So Um, the On the Road book was a book that was not the usual American Dream book. It was about adventure, I guess, and trying out, like, I guess, drugs and doing something different, being different than the American Dream. It got a good review in the Times, and the next day the guy was famous. He was very popular. It influenced many people, and it caused a lot of people to start attacking his writing due to the fact that it was threatening cultural change. They did not want this change to happen because they liked the little cookie cutter, like, everyone's so proper, but it caused a lot of change. The beats were mocked, but they were absorbed by the mainstream people. Like, they mocked them, but there was also a lot of people that absorbed this ideology of wanting to be different and have, like, a more exciting sort of life. Elvis's performing changed the industry, like the performing industry, because the way he moved was something that people hadn't seen before. People called it vulgar and unacceptable, but it was revolutionary because it influenced many people to perform the way that they perform, which also led to how people perform today. White kids sent black artists soaring. That said that in the book as well. Radio stations stopped playing rock and roll, trying to get rid of it. Rock and roll, they thought that if they stopped playing it, that it would go away. And it didn't. Rock and roll was there to stay because the massive numbers of youth culture listened to it. And then it got even more popular because they invented portable turntables so that these kids didn't have to listen to their parents' music. They could buy their own. And again, these kids had their own jobs and their own money, and they could pay for whatever they wanted to because they didn't have to give it to their parents. So they would buy their own portable turntables, and they would play their own music. And Elvis represented the idea of individual freedom. That was he kind of started that whole individual freedom thing where people wanted to be their own people, and it caused a lot of parents to not like it because that's not how they were brought up. Moving on to my primary sources, the Elvis Live interview, 1956. They're talking to him a lot about criticism and how he takes it, and they were asking if the critics got in his head. They were talking about all of the girls that are a little crazy, and basically he just said that he doesn't pay attention to it, and they all have a job to do. He also argued that he didn't feel like he was doing anything wrong with his music. So yeah, and this was right after this wasn't in the book or anything, but something I know background, that they made him wear a tux with, like, a tail to fit in better and not get in trouble, and he hated it. And I feel like he kind of looked in this interview, he looked a little off, but yeah. Next, my second one is the video of the pastor, I believe he is, speaking out against rock and roll. He thinks it's a contributing factor to the juvenile delinquency. He knows how it feels when you're singing. You feel evil. The beat is bad. They also said that the beat pattern is the communist way to corrupt teenagers and people who listen to the rock and roll music. So that was going on a lot at this time as well. That's part of the major controversy. The third one is a newspaper clipping, Could Rock and Roll Be Art? It talks about the influence of rock and roll. It doesn't say anything really bad, I don't think, but it's just kind of talking about how it was brought up and how it was sort of just how it became popular and what it was. They said that it was kind of sprouting from race music is what they called it. The Chuck Berry rock and roll music, this song kind of described / argued that rock and roll music is the best music. In the lyrics, he said, "It's got to be rock and roll music if you want to dance with me." He sings about having a black beat and how when you go down south, all the folks will be dancing. It's a song to describe to describe how he feels about rock and roll music and its importance. My fifth one, the Alan Freed rock and roll radio show. This kind of just shows what the Alan Freed, he was the one earlier in the book that they said had that big black mob or whatever. He was one of the biggest DJs, and I liked, when I was watching this, he would throw the dance parties is what he called them, where a live audience would come and he would play these musics, and the audience was very interactive, and you could tell that it just seemed to be a lot of fun, and people were dancing and cheering, and from what I could hear, it wasn't a video or anything, but he was known for mixing genres such as blues, country, R&B, and rock and roll, obviously. I like this source because it kind of just shows you what people were listening to and what parents were mad about, and yeah. And then my last one is the Frank Sinatra Times X show. I thought this was funny because it was kind of like an SNL. But it was Elvis's first live appearance since serving in the military. And I really liked how it kind of contrasted between the two, or not between the two, but it showed like Frank Sinatra's version of music. It was slow, like kind of oldie, what the parents liked. This was very known of what the parents liked, and as I said earlier, Frank Sinatra did not really like rock and roll. He thought it was provocative, vulgar. He didn't like it very much. I believe he said it was, delinquent on the face of the earth. So, but he invited, Elvis back. It really showed the audience. There's a live audience, and it showed the loudest I heard them cheer was when Elvis was on the screen. And it showed really the excitement of what it was like after Elvis went to war and had come back. The differences in music sounds, and he was more traditional. And I found it interesting. After the war, it was known, or I knew that it was sort of, he got in trouble because of the way he was dancing. He got deployed to go to the military, and he kind of came back, and they were hoping that he would be a little bit more, like, the whole point of them sending him out there was to reel him in a little bit. And I kind of saw, when I was watching it, that the first performance, he was very, like, he just snapped and he didn't really move much, and I saw that there was a difference in the way he was acting. And then the second one, he got a little bit more movement, but it wasn't anything like he had done before. I feel like they tamed him down a little bit, and I feel like after the war, it had stayed that way for a while until a certain time period. But I kind of noticed how Frank Sinatra, after his performance, he did a little comment about the dancing. He did too, actually, because he was moving his shoulders, and he said, "We do the same thing, just in different areas." And he said, "I see the military didn't change you much," or something, after the second performance of how he was dancing. And I was kind of like, oh. So it kind of shows the difference of opinion and how people like Frank viewed the rock and roll and Elvis, and he was still very nice, but he kind of had those backhanded compliments. And yeah, like I said, the audience shows the women's reaction to Elvis because I could just hear how loud they were cheering compared to every other part of the show. And that's all I have. Yeah, I'll be posting my updated bibliography under the assignment as well, so you can see all my sources. I changed out my 2 primary sources, my thesis, and one of my secondary sources. I changed out my 2 secondary sources and then one of my primary sources, number 2. So yeah, I'll just post that so you can see that, but that's that.